Let's talk about the news, shall we? And I'm joined now by David Campbell Bannerman, who's a former Conservative MEP, before that a UKIP MEP, before that a Conservative, but also a chairman of the Freedom Association. David, great to have you on the programme.
Hi, Alex, good to be here.
Now, you have seen the rough and tumble of politics. You've seen the divisions in the Conservative Party, scrapping in that. You've seen the divisions in Nigel Farage's various parties, the scrapping in that. And now you've probably sat back with a big box of popcorn and watched everything unfold yesterday. And I want to know what your reaction is to it all.
Well, it's quite hard to keep up, actually, Alex. I mean, I don't know if I've got time for popcorn to sit back. Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, Zia's gone, the former chairman's gone from Reform. I think that's quite a major change. He credits himself with building up the party dramatically. I think there's probably more to do with Nigel Farage than Zia, but he's certainly a hard-working individual. I don't know what it means. I think they probably need a bit more stability and a bit more professionalism. You saw that in the Scottish by-election, to be honest, where, apparently sort of lack of campaigning experience did actually hold them back a bit. And I've seen that personally in elections where I've been involved. So Reform are a real threat to the Conservative Party, and they're doing very well and they're building very fast. And I'm afraid the Conservatives need to get their act together. We need more serious leadership and more direction.
So do you think, we're talking about serious leadership and Kemi Badenoch, is her speech today enough to sate the true blue grassroots? Because she sort of said, I've looked at this very carefully, I've thought a long time, and I think the only answer is to leave the ECHR. But she's not saying she wants to do it, and she's not saying that's going to be Conservative policy. It seems to me, yet again, sort of half-cocked, circumlocution on the issue. She's saying, well, we might investigate it. I'm going to create a forum of people who can decide. And my previous guest seems to think this is because there's a whole wing of the Conservative Party who consider leaving the ECHR a fundamental red line. And so they can't seem to be able to pick one side or the other. It's like Brexit all over again. Reform might have its issues, but by gum, the Conservatives haven't been able to get over theirs, it seems.
Well, I think you're right in the sense that, Reform has very clear policies, and we need policies. We don't have years to think of something great to come up, for the next election. It could be a lot closer than we think, especially if the government screws up as it is now and we have a debt crisis. The election could be a lot sooner. I welcome the sort of general direction she's going in, but I do think we need much firmer policies. We need stronger leadership. Leadership is about taking position and taking people with you and convincing them you need to do that in order to win elections and to win people back. And when you're below the Lib Dems in some polls, you've got to listen. You really got to listen.
I mean, you've sort of been on both sides of this. You've been in UKIP, you've been in a Conservative Party, so you have experience of, because you're a UKIP MEP back when I was the head of media, I remember very well. But you've seen it all transpire from both sides. So you've sort of looked under the bonnet or been inside the vehicle of a Nigel Farage party, similar with the Conservatives. Do you find that there's sort of discrepancies between the way they operate, or is just both, the rough and tumble of politics?
Well, I think, Reform is a much newer party. I mean, it didn't exist a few years ago. Of course, you could say, well, it's UKIP, but UKIP still exists, by the way. I mean, it's very much led, it is Nigel's party and he's very dominant, and he does have a tendency, I'm afraid, to drive a lot of people away. I mean, I think we lost about 8 MEPs when I was a UKIP MEP, and I left, but I left because I wanted a referendum. I wanted to leave European Union, and UKIP then did not have any real policies, which I tried to introduce. But now I see, Reform have learnt that lesson and are producing a few policies, and we've got to follow that. The Conservatives have got to follow that and ensure that we don't need a fully costed manifesto. I accept that. But what we do need is some policy directions so our troops, our members, are actually G'd up and can, are reassured we're going in the right direction, because they're not at the moment.
I mean, is this not the problem with the legacy parties? They're both in following mode. What's Nigel going to do? We're going to have to react to it, that once again this man somehow manages to steer politics on the sidelines.
Yes, I mean, Well, he's always been brilliant at that. Remember, he without being an MP, he worked to get a Brexit referendum. Essentially, he's been remarkably successful as what I call a pressure party. I mean, Reform is another pressure party, but it's a more real party, Reform, than UKIP. UKIP was about bringing pressure very successfully, but Reform is a real threat to both major parties now. I don't know if people are just seeing it as an alternative. They're very upset with Labour. They feel let down with winter fuel payments, all of this. And they feel let down with us. Our record, I'm afraid, we could have done better in certain areas, absolutely. But, it's interesting. Policy could be the problem, because you were trying to ride two horses, going left on nationalisation or whatever it is, going right in other areas. Nigel is really a sort of Thatcherite Tory. That's his natural instinct. So it's quite a sort of difficult balancing act for Reform. We'll have to see how successful that is over time.
I mean, they seem to be very successful right now. You say that they're a threat to both major parties. I would say that both legacy parties are a threat to Reform. When you look at the polling, Reform's now topping 30% when it comes to projected vote share. The Conservatives are dwindling down below the 15% mark sometimes, and Labour a good 8 points plus behind Reform. But you say that Nigel has a tendency to fall out with people. Now, I want to address this because this is now being spoken very widely in the media, and certainly when you look at the empirical evidence of various departures from Farage-led parties, that is how it might seem. But my experience of Nigel, and you've known him a very long time as well.
I've got a great deal of respect for him.
Yeah, exactly. My experience of him, because I know him super well, isn't that actually he likes picking fights with people on a personal level. It's actually the opposite. That he tends to be a man who sort of shies away from combating people tete-a-tete, and perhaps that then sort of, and also he very quickly adopts people and has great faith in them and says, I trusted you, go out and do something. Then you end up with people sort of making decisions unilaterally. I just want you to talk a little bit, because you say you've got a great deal of respect for him, you know him. Talk to me about how you would interpret his character.
Well, Nigel is incredibly approachable. I mean, I remember when Cameron was leader, he wasn't as approachable as Nigel was. I introduced people to him that were visiting, Brussels, etc. He's very easy to get to know. He's a very likable guy, Nigel. I've got a lot of time for him. I don't like him wanting to destroy the Conservative Party. I mean, I don't think that's productive. And the question has always been, how best to serve the country. I mean, I left UKIP to argue for a referendum. It was only because we got a referendum we were able to actually leave the European Union in the end. Nigel is very strong, very driven. Not everyone can keep up with him. I think you do tend to attract people from all sorts of walks of life when they're a new party. Not all of that works out. And I think that is a problem. You go a certain place down the road.
If you don't mind interrupting, I want to pick up on exactly that point, which is Nigel has a long time been a sponsor of saying we need people in politics who are from the real world. It's been his catchphrase as long as I've known him, and that's what he's done. He has brought to the table, rather than career politicians, people who have worked as spads and been local councillors and stood in 1,000 different seats to demonstrate their loyalty to the party before being given their opportunity. In the meantime, having whips that are able to, gather and retain a lot of skeletons in closets. Nigel's actually identified very clever people from the real world, people like Rupert Lowe, Ben Habib, Zia Yusuf, brought them in and said, you're brilliant, I see great potential in you, go forth and prosper. But actually, maybe there is, from all of this fallout, maybe there's an argument as to why parties like the Conservative Party, like the Labour Party, seem to have a conveyor belt system that if you want to get to the upper ranks of the party, you have to have jumped through all these hoops first, because it sort of then does beat into people the collegiate mentality, the loyalty and the discipline.
Well, I think that's a very good point. I would say actually the Conservative Party has lost that. It's tried to bring in people with not the right experience, who've not gone through the loops. I had to fight a no-hope seat in Scotland, Glasgow, Rutherglen. I wasn't expecting to win that way back now, 97. But I mean, you kind of worked your way up and you got experience of politics. And I think that's very important. I mean, I know from Reform friends that a lot of people don't even know what a polling station is or whatever. And I don't mock that. They are learning, but they are very new to this, very green. And I think that is a major issue, but they have made a lot of progress very quickly. And in order to counter them, our party, the Conservative Party, has to think quickly about the broad policy frameworks, at least, and get that out to fire up the troops and keep the MPs happy, because they're not happy at the moment. And that's the only way forward, And I want that reassurance from the Conservative Party, because if it's not given soon, we'll lose even more members.
Yeah, David, if you don't mind me saying, you sound like a man who could be tempted to cross the floor back again.
No, well, look, it's I've had some nice entreaties, but I want to stick with the Conservatives. But the bottom line is we have to raise our game, and we have to be more serious, and we have to be clear about what we stand for, even if it means we lose a few MPs that can't stand it, who are too, frankly, Lib Dem. I mean, the Lib Dems are doing quite well. Why don't you go and join them? We've got to sort this out, because otherwise, the party is just trapped in this position where it can't be, too right wing. It can't counter reform. There's a lot of nonsense arguments saying, well, we must, take on the Lib Dems. No, we've tried that. It didn't work. We ended up with coalition government. What we've got to do is believe in what we believe in, like Thatcher did, and actually get back to some first fundamentals. And then actually people will start coming back to us.
David, it's been fantastic having you on the programme. That is DCB, David Campbell, Bannerman, once Conservative, then UKIP, now Conservative again. So he's had a real good insight into the lot of it. Now,